categorically deny that there are any living MIA in Vietnam.
Wrong answer. In a no man's land, playing a game of trust and betrayal. The prisoner they couldn't hold is now the soldier they can't stop.
One man who couldn't forget the Americans that were left behind.
Everybody goes home is a slogan. Speak for yourself.
Free the soldiers.
We're going home?
Missing in action.
Damn right.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon,
do it!
we decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we've been doing for over a year. There's something like 40 episodes waiting for you. If you haven't made the jump yet, I'd consider doing that. And speaking of which, since this is the first episode we've done since I got back from the Toronto Film Fest, we got a list here. So sorry that normally I don't have to read out this many names, but I got to go a little bit fast this week. So we got David, just David, welcome. Joseph Gluck, Gregory, Patrick Nolan, Joseph Torchinsky, Simia Canis, Reno D, Leslie Flores, Kurt Schiller, Robert Satan Harris, Philip Campbell, and Mike Wisen.
Thank you, guys.
So thanks so much for being with us, guys,
for real.
and getting all those bonus episodes. I hope you guys are enjoying. I saw a couple of them have entered the Discord and have been talking in the Discord as well. So if you guys do become patrons, you get access to that. So that's the one plug for the week. The other plug of the week, iTunes. If you guys are listening on iTunes, make sure to give us a good old rating and review over there. If you've been digging the show, it helps us find new listeners, and we appreciate that as well. But those are your plugs for the week. I'm your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back.
We are back for another episode here. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys would have heard from us, and that would have been Will Menaker of the Chapo Trap House podcast came on our show, and he brought with him a John Frankenheimer muscular car ownage double feature of Ronin, 1998.
Love it.
With Robert De Niro and Jean Reno, as well as his 1966 Formula One sports drama epic Grand Prix, which had some absolutely amazing car sequences.
Insane.
And an opening credits by, once again, Saul Bass that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, all those like close-ups of just the nuts
inside
and bolts
the engines and like,
it was great.
Unreal. So if you haven't heard that episode, that was just 2 weeks ago. That's for on any podcast listener of choice. But 1 week ago, I think would have been the last time our bonus listeners over on Patreon would have heard from us. And with the release of Rambo, Last Blood, which Jamie and I haven't had a chance to see yet as of recording, but maybe have by the time you guys are listening to this episode. But we did
open for good things.
We did a big episode, one of our 3 movie episodes, and we did Rambo First Blood Part 2, 1985. We did Rambo 3, which I think was 87, and then we did all the way up to Rambo or John Rambo 2008.
Yeah.
So we did a full deep dive into everything Rambo, getting ready for Rambo Last Blood, and so if you want that episode, that was, again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's bonus episode. And actually, that episode set us up perfectly for what we are about to dive into this week. Joining us is a freelance writer. I think he writes about film, and I think he writes over at Pitchfork about music. And also he is the host of the Cinematary podcast. That is Nathan Smith. Nathan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm a fan of the podcast and very happy to be on.
Thanks for joining us. Now, the way that it works, Nathan, as you probably know, is we get the guests to bring on the double feature with them. So what 2 films have you brought with you this week, and why did they pair together?
So, as you mentioned, there's a little bit of a connection between the Rambo franchise and the 2 movies that I picked today. And those movies are Missing in Action from 1984, directed by Joseph Zito, and, of course, starring the one, the only Chuck Norris. The other movie is not quite so well known, but it's about a similar topic, and also produced by Canon Films. And this movie has a number of titles. I believe that the original title is Behind Enemy Lines. But of course, that is also the title of a movie from that strange period in time when they were trying to make Owen Wilson an action star. So it also is known under the title POW The Escape and Attack Force NAM, which that's the title that I was actually able to find it online under.
Yeah.
It wasn't really available as either Behind Enemy Lines or POW The Escape. And this movie is directed by the relatively unknown Gideon Amir and stars David Carradine. And the reason why I picked both of these movies is because, of course, as you guys mentioned, Rambo Last Blood is coming out this week. I actually had the chance to see it yesterday.
Oh, shit. And?
No spoilers, but what's a general consensus?
It's basically it's a Taken movie in Rambo's clothing. Like, it has really little connection to like the other Rambo movies. It's just like
that actually sounds kind of disappointing.
I mean, it's interesting because it's like largely kind of like a generic Millennium Entertainment sort of barely above DTV kind of mediocre thriller. But the violence is pretty horrifying and is like verging on Rambo as slasher.
Okay. Well, that sounds better.
Yeah, it's like it has no reason to get as bonkers as it does. And the last 10 minutes is like a really insane kind of set piece. And so I think it's worth seeing. I don't think it's particularly good. And it's just kind of a weird entry. I don't know, because it just feels like some other sort of Stallone vehicle that was just shoehorned into being a Rambo movie.
Interesting.
Honestly.
Damn. Well, as people who just dove into the Rambos, we were hoping for something a little bit more personalized than that. But I was scared when I saw that the filmmaker he attached to this one did look like they were kind of a little bit more sort of generic, low budget action.
Yeah, especially with the way that they end Rambo 2008 with him walking onto the farm.
After the set piece that they finished that movie on.
Seemed pretty finalized.
The contradiction,
So, yeah. All right, well, I'm still hoping for the best.
Oh, yeah, we're going to check it out regardless. But this is going to be a fun double feature, and it especially works because we specifically address it in our Rambo episode. But when we were doing Rambo 2 specifically, that has to do... very much is based on the sort of like Vietnam conspiracy of
what do you call it? Was Bo
it was called the POW MIA issue, the Prisoner of War Missing in Action, and largely it was just a conspiracy that after the peace accords had been signed and the war was officially over, that Vietnam was still holding American troops as prisoners of war and torturing them and like bamboo
get our boys
fencing
back
and
home.
Right, and from what I understand, both of these films and especially Missing in Action, even though these weren't the first films to ever tackle this subject, but the James Cameron treatment for Rambo 2, everyone kind of got a chance to read it. And that was what Missing in Action came out, it was produced basically based on his treatment for Rambo 2. So they were basically just like, well, shit, we just take the idea, we'll just write our own screenplay and make it faster. And they got the movie out before Rambo 2.
Yeah, I was wondering that because
killer.
they came out the same year, right?
It came out 1 year earlier, actually, than Rambo.
Okay.
But James Cameron's treatment for a Rambo sequel had been going around for years, though, at the time. Like, he had written it long before they actually decided to go ahead and make it. And James Cameron famously has disavowed the movie, saying that Stallone's rewrites on it basically make it not the movie he wrote.
Oh, wow.
So, but anyway, before we get too deep into that, that's going to bring us to Missing in Action. So I think we're going to jump right into it. We are going to jump into Missing in Action.
Chuck Norris.
James Braddock declares war. The war isn't over until the last man comes home. America had no more heroes. until now. Chuck Norris, missing in action.
All right, we are talking Missing in Action, the 1984 American action film directed by Joseph Zito, as Nathan mentioned, and starring the legendary American screen presence, Chuck Norris.
Yes.
This
personally, by the way, this is my first Chuck Norris film. I don't know about
Oh,
you.
wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So this was something. What about you, Josh?
I've seen a couple of his
Okay.
appearances in Bruce Lee films.
I have a big blind spot with.
So I've
Bruce Lee.
seen some of his martial arts work already, so I'm a little lucky on that front. I think it's really unfortunate for anyone that for this to be your first Chuck Norris experience.
That's kind of the feeling I got, because I was like, personally, I found that he lacked like any type of charisma when it came to the delivery of lines. Like, a lot of it is just him very stoic, and I think what he's trying to do is just be like, I'm super focused, I know what I'm doing, and I'm gonna get the job done. But instead, it just comes across as extremely dull for me. So
and dispassionate.
Oh yeah,
you're supposed to believe he's
not
like
an ounce
some
of humanity in this guy.
Some like Rolling Thunder-esque like PTSD and like patriotism has like kind of like brought him into this. He needs to go and free all these prisoners who are being locked up.
Because we open with that dream sequence, which has a very funny ending when he grabs 2 grenades and then body slams
and just
the guy.
Like this cartoonish Vietnamese soldier who is like stabbing his friend
over
like
and
30
over
times.
again.
Like, I felt like I was watching Tropic Thunder for a second, where it's just like, that bit where he's like holding his guts.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like, how many stabs could that guy take before he stopped screaming?
Yeah. And then also it's like, dude, why are you body slamming him? You could just drop those nades right on him.
Well, no, because he's so passionate.
Yeah, that's what it was, the passion. Oh, man.
I think, Chuck Norris is like definitely it's the least cool of all the 80s action stars, I feel like. Basically everybody else has some kind of like, a little bit exotic appeal, where like, even if the movies are deeply reactionary, you can say like, there's a way to read Schwarzenegger and Stallone as artists, and as auteurs, but like Chuck Norris is just so totally cornflake and Wonder Bread, like bland.
He truly feels like a stuntman that just was like, hey, we don't have our lead. Could you do it? Like, that's what it felt like while I was watching it.
It was really funny to me seeing the whole Bruce Lee discourse around Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because, there were so many people who were like, oh, Rick Dalton could, this would never happen. Like, Brad Pitt could never beat Bruce Lee. And it's like, well, Chuck Norris, in like, actual Hollywood history, sure, it's like was a fixed fight, but Chuck Norris was like, the original stuntman who like shouldn't have beaten Bruce Lee, but did. And so, it totally feels, he totally feels kind of just accidental to me, and like, and it's also very telling that I feel like his most enduring success was on television, as Walker, Texas Ranger, beyond, the canon movies. Like, I think that's, where the like Chuck Norris joke, like, meme,
like the manly man. Biceps on biceps kind of guy. Yeah. Even though that's really not what his screen presence was. He's actually kind of a weirdo. Yeah, like he just kind of like vacuous in a way that I don't.
Is he always like this too? Like, in the same as Missing in Action? Is he the same in all the films?
I've never found him to play like he never plays. He just kind of
plays the martial artist badass guy with no real emotion.
Yeah,
kind of
pretty
thing?
much.
Okay.
Okay, but Bruce Lee was like a million times more charismatic, and him and Bruce Lee were actually like kind of like friends. Like I actually believe that I was looking this up that Bruce Lee actually consulted on a lot of Chuck Norris's movies as like the sort of like a fight choreographer.
Well, I will say there's a ton of like kicking in this film as opposed to actual punching or anything like that. Like, there's a sequence
which is weird to see in a Vietnam movie context, right?
Absolutely, because how
many of these young traumatized boys were like, martial artists, like trained martial artists?
Yeah. Like that sequence where I think he kicks a dude like 4 times in a row and then just tosses him out a window.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's moments like that don't seem to, those were the moments I enjoyed, to be honest. And it doesn't seem to fit with like the rest of the baseline of what this movie is. Because there's a couple absurd moments that I wish the whole movie did the entire time. Like I wish it was always as absurd. Like the moment where he goes underwater and then rises in slow motion underwater, and he's got this soaking wet giant machine gun that he's just firing off.
There's
like,
so much slow motion in this movie.
Yeah,
it's so weirdly like fetishistic.
Yeah.
And like it's very clearly designed to be like a, even because it's so funny. We just talked about this on Rambo.
Yeah.
And my one thing about Rambo First Blood Part 2 is I was like, this
so
is
much style.
Well, at least it's so like on another planet in
Yes.
terms of the way that it's stylized.
Exactly.
That like there's something weird about this that feels ickier because it's just like a real world context. What is the context for me to just shred a bunch of Vietnamese people in slow motion and do it like righteously? Right. And that's kind of what this ultimately kind of read to as for me, which, by the way, for anyone who hasn't read it, and thanks for Nathan for I noticed that Nathan had read this piece too, but there's a piece on Letterboxd by the user PD187.
Oh my God.
He did.
Dude, that article like changed my life. Like turned me to a fucking conspiracy.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it
level.
in the show notes of this episode so that people can get a chance to read it in full. Because unfortunately, we don't have the time to really like dive into it because it's like thousands of words on this movie, and he traces the history from 1973. From actually, I don't know if it's he or she. Their father was a sort of like, you know, a Vietnam vet and had so they heard a lot about like, you know, people who had these anxieties about these sort of, our boys are missing and the government turned their backs on them. Right. And it tracks it from 1973 all the way into, you know, sort of Hollywood's relationship with the story, how they started sort of pushing these narratives, how Bo Gritz got involved, who we talked about on Rambo First Blood Part 2, because that we did mention Bo Gritz because he was like the original conspiracy theorist that, you know, actually pointed to all of this. But then he relates it actually to Chuck Norris and sort of like Chuck Norris's background history with Bruce Lee and with Polanski, and ties it into like a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood kind of story, and then ties it all the way back to like fucking like CIA and white nationalist like stuff and the history of John Wayne's like the Green Beret. And Chuck Norris it being in that as well. And it was just like, this whole article is absolutely insane and will give you so much context for everything that we're about to talk to here, which is just the actual conspiracy, laying out what it is that the guys believed, and then how certain people in Hollywood who had, you know, were financially motivated by some of these guys ended up making scripts that basically cathartically rendered this conspiracy theory like kind of like valid, and then also how that seeped into normal people's perception. Yeah, a lot of people probably who might be a little like, you know, not curious enough to research it for themselves, it's probably just like, oh man, Rambo, he's got to go get all those prisoners of war that they're just torturing back there. When by the 90s they had done a full scale like Washington inquiry into all of this, and we're like, it's fine. There's zero shred of like physical evidence of any of this of any kind. They were like, we like even John McCain, like you know, not a lefty. He's like, there's no and an actual prisoner of war in Vietnam. Even he is like, there was no prisoners of war after we signed the accords. Like they sent them all back, and like, so it's just fascinating to watch two movies that are so completely, you know, embrace this as like, you know, history basically, and that itself is kind of fascinating and kind of drives, you know, my entertainment value for both these films kind of goes up a little bit when you give it all of that context. I think also there's a difference between some of the moments in POW compared to this one. Like with POW, they have plenty of that, you know, conspiratorial stuff and because I would say the premise of both is the same. Right, and all of that, like, but they do take different modes of action. But there are moments where it shows the American soldiers as kind of like prejudice and things like that, very very subtly, but it does it. Whereas with this one, like the first thing that happens when he gets to Vietnam is Chuck Norris refuses to shake the hand of the Vietnamese leader, and you know it turns out that of course Chuck Norris was right about him, but like we don't know that. So it just comes off as completely racist, and so you're just kind of like not a good start, I would say, for relations. But Chuck Chuck Norris is the cool, smart guy.
Right.
He knows
so
everything.
he figured it out.
Yeah.
They were after him the whole time. So, they try to make up for that later on. And it's just not sensitive to the subject matter. Whereas at least with POW, although it isn't, it kind of has moments where
it's
it
a
tries.
little bit like, we'll give it credit for being a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, it's a little more nuanced. Tiny bit.
Yeah, I think that, POW has like loftier aspirations a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of the filmmaking, where it like maybe wants to be a sort of Platoon or like Hamburger Hill type.
Yeah.
Comment on the 60s in addition to being just like a war movie. There's that scene where all the soldiers are singing Proud Mary for some reason.
Right.
And, so it feels like it almost feels to me a little bit more like, the Steel Helmet, the Sam Fuller movie, where it's like, it has a little bit to say about the war in terms of like a socio-political statement, but Missing in Action is just like total, like emotional, like pure ideology. It's just like totally convinced of the existence of POWs, and POW The Escape even takes place like at the very end of the war, so it's even not fully like entirely giving into the insane conspiracy in the way that Missing in Action is, where it's like, this is a decade after Vietnam, and these guys who are somehow still alive.
Oh yeah, well, and the actual narrative itself is just him proving it. Because the reason he gets to Vietnam at all is because they're having further talks at like this public thing. So the whole point is that he's just going to go there and show everyone at the giant press conference that there were POWs. And weirdly enough, too, this movie has no interest in the actual POWs. Like they're not people. No. They're literally props for Chuck Norris to prove that he's right. Yeah. Whereas like at least in POW, The Escape, like they actually do investigate them as people who were imprisoned and have, traumas and have things to say to each other. And like here, like they are just literal, like Chuck Norris. They are like the MacGuffin of the movie that Chuck Norris has to find them and reveal them.
What's fascinating, and I mean, I'm jumping a little bit, but I think it just correlates well, is at the end when he does that smile. It's the only time that he emotes throughout the entire film, and you can tell that it's not a smile of like, we got our boys back. It's more of a smile of like, I fucking told you so. You know what I mean? Like there's not an ounce of like of empathy. It's just I'm right because I'm fucking Chuck Norris and I told you I'd figure this out. And even that, the ending that's supposed to be like triumphant, still has this lack of sensitivity.
It has a smugness.
Yeah. You're like, dude. What?
I mean, and that's
about something that's like completely fake. So you're just like,
exactly.
But I mean, that's the whole kind of the like evolution of the POW MIA myth, because it sort of rises actually during the war when there are POWs and the official policy, before the Nixon administration was, keep it quiet. If your family member is a POW, you're not allowed to talk about it. It's a private government issue. They'll figure it out. However, then these organizations start badgering the government, and the Nixon administration puts out this, like something like 2,000 POWs or something. And then the war ends, and it's like no longer this emotional, like, issue about just families, concerned about their sons or whatever. It like turns into this, proving that we're right, that like America is injured in somehow, and that it's not the aggressor, that it's really the victim of the war. It just turns into this total nutcase thing. And like you say, it's not even like a feeling really. It's just like a need to prove.
Yeah.
Right. And I find, the kind of the blankness of Chuck Norris interesting in that way, because it really reminds me of the like most iconic symbol of the POW MIA issue, the black POW MIA flag, which has the like this white oval in the center with a black silhouette of this sullen looking soldier looking down, and there's like a guard, a watchtower in the distance and some barbed wire, and it says POW MIA, you are not forgotten. And it's the only flag, that's flown above the White House other than the Stars and Stripes, the only other flag that hangs in the Capitol Rotunda. It's required to fly above most government buildings at least 6 days a year. But it's just, founded on this like now over time, it's come to just represent generally like the missing in action from every American war, but it's founded on this total lie. And it's also, it's just this like blank silhouette, the unknown soldier. And I feel like Chuck Norris in this way is like supposed to kind of represent the unknown soldier, because he's just like total at like a blank slate to project some kind of feeling upon. And,
just put him in jeans, plaid, cowboy
Right.
boots, have him walk through a Vietnam strip club, and he's the man.
And you know what I find
Yeah.
interesting too is throughout the film, like a lot of the time what they do writing wise is they give these guys like, a scene where it shows how intelligent they are battlefield wise or something like that. But there are like several times throughout this film where he just goes, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out." And then it cuts to the next scene in which they've already figured it out. And you're just like, they do that, I think, 3 or 4 times in the movie. And it gets to the point where I'm just kind of like, it's like the movie it's like Chuck Norris himself knows that there's a script, like even his character, and he doesn't have to figure it out. We'll get there. Don't worry about
The
it.
pages are coming in. I sense it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, well, and it doesn't even have, and I do think that, I mean, there is like something so empty about Chuck Norris's performance that does
it's
kind of
so
create
soulless.
like a weird, sort of off kilter quality to it. But I really did feel like this was missing, like the stylized, like psycho, sweaty energy of Rambo, and even Stallone. Is that his movie has that energy. And Stallone is like completely intimate in his performance.
Yes,
So you kind of get like 2 different modes that you can engage that movie on.
That was the thing too. It's just like Norris doesn't even act. There's like nothing about it. He just says his line and then shoots some people.
No, like even when he's doing like absolutely insane things, like sneaking out of his hotel, going and murdering one of the Vietnamese officials, and then making his way back. And they're being like, okay, a Vietnamese official just got murdered. So, like, someone want to check on the American hero?
Yeah.
And he gets into the room just in time to rip the girl's shirt off, jump into bed with her, and pretend that he's having sex. And the face that he makes when they come in and they're just, like, supposed to believe that he didn't go and kill that guy because he's clearly having sex right now.
Yeah.
It's a completely blank expression, which is just like, dude, if he was not having sex... Like it's so clear, and I mean obviously they can't prove that, but it's just like it's this thing where it's just like if that's the face he makes while he's having sex, like they should check if she's okay.
I mean, I kind of feel like Chuck Norris also could very well have never had sex. Like, he just has no feeling at all. Like I just don't believe him in a relationship with a human being at all.
Another weird thing about just the perspective of that part. And, like, eventually she finds out what he was doing. So I'm sure a bit of calmness came to her. But at first, he doesn't tell her. So she's just assuming she's being sexually assaulted. and then, like, 10 seconds later, it's revealed of what he was doing. So she, like, I was like, from the perspective of her character, I was really concerned. I was like, you must be just flipping out right now. Like, holy shit.
Yeah, he can't even like fake act. That's the thing. Yeah. Like, because he could have even been like, look, this is what I'm about to do.
Right. It's like, they're coming. We have to, just anything. Like 3 lines where he's just like, they're coming. Just strip. And she gets a little confused and she's like, okay, but why? But no, instead he just starts stripping her down immediately. And all I could think of was like how she must just be fucking so scared like of what's going on. It's just such a bizarre sequence.
There's a lot of just generally like very bizarre moments in this movie that almost feel a little like, to me, the parts in Bloodsport and Kickboxer where Jean-Claude Van Damme is kind of just like wandering around exploring these countries that are not his own. But because Chuck Norris like totally lacks that strange charm, it's just like a very weird travel movie. Like the part where he goes to Thailand and there are strangely several like instrumental electro tracks by Ice-T on the soundtrack to this movie that play when he goes to Thailand. Yeah, and there's also, like, I can't remember what it is now because I watched this, like, 2 weeks ago, but there's some American song, like, pop song that gets covered in a club or something.
Yeah, at the strip club. I can't remember what song it is, but I remember thinking it was super weird that they were doing, like, an English pop song.
Yeah, oh my god, I like need to remember what that was because it's so bizarre. Just like having that little detail in this movie.
Yeah.
No, yeah, and that part is also where the car chase happens, right? Does that happen in Thailand?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that
Yes,
because it's like
yeah.
extremely random.
Because he meets up with his buddy who's there, who I think was also a vet, and
He's
he's
like
just
that-
like
now
we're
he's like a fisherman or something?
gonna go get these boys.
Yeah.
We're gonna get them, and you just
boys.
you couldn't believe it less. Like you just really don't feel that he cares at all.
No.
About these.
I'll give it
people.
for this side character though. Like he's trying to work with Chuck Norris.
Oh, and there's one great gag where Chuck Norris walks in on him having a threesome.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
pretty funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, like he and Chuck Norris then, form a plot that they are just going to get these POWs out. And that's basically like the rest of the movie. It's just them breaking them out through, just good old American determination.
Yep.
And yeah, that the action in this is kind of weird because we talked about it before, but there's that suspense scene where he like leaves his place and it's a bit of an espionage movie for a second.
Yeah.
And then there's like an action car chase scene in the war movie. And then he's doing martial arts in the war movie.
Yeah.
So like none of this action makes sense within like the context of Vietnam War movies. Because I mean we've talked about a couple on this show, like even something like Casualties of War, which we loved. It's just like, how do you watch that and then watch this? Like there's
You're right. There's like a lot. There's not a lot
Something's
of actual
lost in translation.
like, jungle gunplay.
No.
Which is odd when you think about it.
It's a lot of Chuck Norris. I mean, when I think in the part in Thailand is when he like kicks the shit out of that one dude
And throws him out the
and
window.
then throws
yeah.
him out the window on top of all the
He
like shop
he
carts
takes out
below.
a food vendor, which I thought was really funny because I'm like, he just heard an innocent trying
And
to
just what
hurt
an
you.
asshole.
Oh my god.
This movie is about how Chuck Norris just goes around like terrorizing people.
Vietnam. Yeah. Oh my God.
And then yeah, it's really the final third that is just him gunning down,
Yeah.
just shredding people.
And they even play like that sequence I was talking about earlier where he rises out of the water and like the big wet machine gun and
There's like
everything,
this
which
really
would totally
like
malfunction, I
inspirational
assume.
like score.
It's very
playing.
triumphant music, yeah. And they even play it for a bit of comedy because they blow up Chuck Norris's boat or whatever he was on. And then he goes under the water, and like 3 Vietnamese soldiers start
they start
laughing.
cackling.
They're like, ha ha ha. and then Chuck Norris rises out of the thing, and they all just go like, ha ha, what? And then like, boom, explosion, and they just get murked by Chuck Norris's machine gun. And then it was just such an odd tone. They kept changing it. It was like, here's your action beat, but then there's a bit of comedy here. But then you're going to watch a bunch of Vietnamese get slaughtered. And then like it was just so all over the place. And in a kind of good way in that sequence, because at least I was engaged. I thought it was like entertaining. It's not good.
You weren't
but
like bored to death.
Yeah. Because a lot of it is pretty dull. Thanks to Chuck Norris. I feel like if he just brought a little something, it could have been.
It's definitely the
more
worst
interesting.
performance I've ever seen as the lead in a Vietnam War movie. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Oh, yeah.
like I kept thinking this whole time. I was thinking of is it Tom Devine who's the guy in Rolling Thunder? I kept thinking
sounds
about
familiar.
how completely useless he is in comparison to that guy who has just who has the non PTSD, who was a prisoner of war, and he has that great monologue about how he tells him how you have to learn to love the rope.
Yeah.
And he has this really complex psychology that he brings home, and when he starts unleashing sort of like domestic violence alongside Tommy Lee Jones,
Right.
Like there's just sort of like this weird, like almost sensual brotherly bond that those two have in that movie that is really like interesting to watch.
Yep.
And I just couldn't help but be like, wow, so this guy, they gave Chuck Norris the same plot as those guys, or the same like trauma and
feeling,
experiences
yeah.
that they should have.
Right.
And he just it doesn't feel like it changes him at all. It doesn't register. The
No,
closest
the
we
most
get
we-
is the opening scene where it's plot, where it's just him having that nightmare and then kicking the TV, being like, man,
After
nah.
watching Spider-Man.
Yeah.
For a long time, by the way. They have like a good 30-second
just
spot of
watching
that
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man part.
Yeah.
And I was a little curious, like, did that relate to anything for anybody there? Was that
No clue.
Okay? I just was wondering.
It seems like one of those okay, we need some sort of character specificity, and we're not going to get it out of his performance.
He likes
so
Spider-Man.
He likes Spider-Man. We need to differentiate him from Rambo somehow because we literally just stole this plot from the treatment for the Rambo script.
Yeah, it's just
that's
bearded
coming out
Rambo.
next year.
Yeah.
So that's pretty. I mean, once you know that, it kind of reveals what this movie is because you're just like, they saw someone else's script. And they made their own, and they turned it around in 1 year to get it out before that movie.
To claim originality, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, just to get ahead of. I think they were trying to actually get ahead of any sort of plagiarism because
it was obviously plagiarized in some small regard.
Yeah, so when you consider that, then you're like, oh, that's why Chuck Norris isn't performing. They didn't even have time to figure out what he was or to find an actor who could perform or
Yeah, it really does feel like they just got one of the stuntmen to do it.
And they, not to mention that they also shot this and Braddock Missing in Action, the prequel, back to back. So
there's a prequel.
It's just the whole thing is
a prequel to this film.
Line.
There's a prequel to this film.
Yeah, the sequel, Braddock Missing in Action, is about Chuck Norris's Vietnam experience.
Is it Chuck Norris again?
Yeah. And then there's a
Holy
third
shit.
film as well. But the first and second ones were
It's a
filmed.
trilogy?
Yeah. And the
Oh my
first and second ones were filmed immediately back to back.
Holy shit.
So they had finished 2 Missing in Action movies, in fact, before Rambo First Blood Part 2 came out.
Oh man.
Which is kind of an amazing testament to the Canon Films machine.
Yeah, for real. I had no idea this was a part of a trilogy.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Canon Films were
I
pretty
honestly
nuts
might check them
as
out just for the
producers
sake of-
being able to pump stuff out. I mean, when we get to POW, they also produce that,
Right.
and it's funny. The screenplay is by the same guy as this.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh
which
my
is just really funny.
I also feel like in terms of tone, it's worth mentioning that the Vietnamese general is played by James Hong, who is most familiar to me as the head waiter in the Chinese restaurant episode of Seinfeld.
Oh yeah.
And so I just he is not really giving a very serious performance to begin with. You can tell that this dude is just kind of fucking around a little bit, probably with this very stupid movie. But I just could not take the movie. It was even more difficult to take it seriously for that. He was supposed to be the top dog in the North Vietnamese military.
Yeah.
So
Totally. All right. Well, I think we're gonna enter the reductive rating on this one, which for you, Nathan, is the part of the show where we take away all the words and the nuance, and we reduce the movie between a number between 1 and 5. But also, it's turned into kind of closing statements. So if there's any scene or line or thing you haven't had a chance to get to that you want to mention it, this is the part where we do that. For me, this has got to get the 2, I think, because there's really, I think it's one of the worst 80s and Vietnam movies that I've ever seen. And Chuck Norris, and the only thing that it has of interest going for it is how not good Chuck Norris is, and how it pushes a completely ludicrous historical conspiracy as fact inside the body of something that's not at all convincing. Because even at least with Rambo First Blood Part 2, which pushes this same conspiracy, it's there's something more to engage with in that film. You still
even Rambo's background.
You still
his
identify with
character.
his sort of transcendental rage that he has.
Yeah, exactly.
And I
he
mean,
just wants to help the troops and get them home.
and Cosmatos really does nail again that sweaty psycho style that it has to it with these huge colors, these huge explosions. One explosion literally killed a guy on set.
So that gets some added points.
Yeah, well, I hate to say it, sorry, guy.
A little bit, though.
But that's pretty insane.
That's pretty
How stupidly large these explosions were. And I mean, you have Stallone, who even at his worst can carry a movie. So. Sure. Just even in direct comparison to a movie that's basically pushing the same ideas, it's just like it's unbelievably poor in comparison.
Yeah.
So this is gonna get kind of like a lower 2 for me, I think honestly, and it is pretty amazing though that this was the thing that Hollywood was after, and that this was a huge financial success.
It was?
Yeah, it was. That's
wow.
why they made 3 of them, and that's
Yeah,
why
I guess, okay.
there was this.
Shit.
It was a commercially successful film, and part of actually what sort of like I mentioned the article by PD187 at the top of the section here, but part of what he kind of dives into is just like how much someone validating this conspiracy was like, what it meant to a lot of, because it was transitioned from a literal thing into more of like an emotional idea of we were betrayed.
Right.
Our government let us down. Like that, it became more of a way to sort of emotionally get that sentiment across.
Yeah. And people were already pretty unhappy with Vietnam itself, so maybe it was also kind of that push to continue that a little bit,
Yeah,
they
so
were
It's
upset.
also, I mean, it's kind of the like right-wing version of Watergate, basically. That's just like total loss of faith in the U.S. government.
Yeah.
thing.
Exactly, and I think that it's interesting that so many movies came out and that they were popular of this nature. Like it speaks to kind of like what people were interested in seeing and feeling at
sure.
in 1984 and 1985. That this and Rambo: First Blood Part 2 were like 2 of the biggest action movies ever at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm also gonna give it the 2. I mean, I just found a lot of it to be pretty dull. I mean, Chuck Norris just doesn't act really. Like, I mean, especially after seeing POW, which we'll be talking about soon, where David is like, clearly trying to give a performance, and he a lot more nuance to his character and things like that. Even though they're pretty much doing the same conspiracy. It's
the same plot basically.
Yeah, it just feels like there's more emotion in POW. So I don't have much else to say. I found it to be pretty dull, and with something like this where they're gonna take a conspiracy theory that some could probably argue
you got to go nuts with it, right? You got to go Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Yeah, that's why I love it, because it's just so absurd and over the top and stylized. So I mean, that's why I fucking love Rambo Part 2. It's not that I agree with the conspiracy theory. I just love watching it, and this one is just dull. So yeah.
It's just, how do you translate that feeling? Is it Chuck Norris like doing a blank expression, being like, "Who, me having sex?"
Right.
Or do you do Rambo, who like unloads 300 rounds into an intelligence computer?
I was just gonna say they don't have that scene because that's fucking amazing.
like the bit where Keanu fires his gun in Point Break, like he's like having an orgasm.
Yeah, he's just like, no!
Yeah, and Rambo's shouting at the top of his lungs. Like that is such a visceral expression of that feeling.
Yeah.
And it's cinematically compelling to watch that feeling, be expressed in that way. Whereas this doesn't at all. It just has the plot.
To Norris, Norris is buff, but he's kind of that like 50-year-old dad buff. You know what I mean? It's like Stallone.
He could fight though. He could fight.
Yeah, it's just I love that sequence with Stallone like shooting up and shooting all the intelligence stuff, and there's just nothing at all that comes close to that in MIA. So.
Yeah, there's no rawer expression of that than him literally shooting the computer.
Like we said, the most we get is at the end, he gives a little smile, and all it is a, "Fuck you, I was right, I'm Chuck Norris." So, yeah, gonna give it a 2.
Right. For you, Nathan?
I think I'm also going to have to go with good old number 2. For the reasons that you guys outline, even though this is this like very emotionally sort of invested conspiracy theory, there's a startling lack of affect to this movie and to Chuck Norris's performance. I do have a little bit of fondness for him, just like as a person, because the whole, as I mentioned earlier, the whole like Chuck Norris meme is just like very strange. And I actually grew up in Central Texas, like 40 minutes from his compound. So, he's this just like weird American presence. And I actually kind of started to have a different view of him because of the Guy Madden movie, The Green Fog.
I haven't seen that, but I've heard it's good.
I saw that. Yeah, it's this remake of Vertigo using footage of other films and television shows filmed in San Francisco. And there's like an amazing sequence with some, I think it might be like a TV movie or something, or a television show from early in Chuck Norris's career, where Guy Madden uses all of these like extremely blank shots of Chuck Norris's face to like recreate Jimmy Stewart's Vertigo. So
He'd be
they're
very good at that role.
Yeah,
just the blank space, or blank face.
Exactly. Like there is a certain kind of like expression of the traumatic experience that I in Chuck Norris's blankness and just like utter charisma void that I find kind of interesting.
What is your favorite Chuck Norris movie / performance? Like, what's the one we should check out if we haven't?
Well, I mean, go ahead.
Honestly, like you got at the end of the day, you got to just like turn on some episodes of Walker, Texas Ranger, which I actually, inspired by the movie Lone Wolf McQuade, also starring David Carradine of our next movie. So maybe actually Lone Wolf McQuade is the
is that the one where they verse each other? Because I was actually just going to mention that one.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So that one is pretty decent. Because I watched listed that one. I was really hoping it'd be good after I watched these two films. So
it's at the very least like one of the more like legitimately iconic ones, I think.
Cool.
Invasion USA is also pretty nuts.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking about doing next, because it's just it had the poster with him in front of like the White House with like two Uzis.
Yeah,
I was like
right up for this show. Absolutely.
And I will say, this is just like more of a movie of like weird, odd moments of coincidence than anything else, like the Spider-Man cartoon and the Ice-T songs on the soundtrack. And I remembered what the song was that's covered. It's Do You Think I'm Sexy by Rod Stewart. Just having this like broken English cover of Do You Think I'm Sexy in a movie with a star who is not sexy at all.
Oh man.
Is like kind of great, but also like it's just those parts. It's not the sum total. It's just a lot of like broken pieces.
Oh man, Chuck Norris is in the Wrecking Crew. How was he not in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? That's the scene. That's the Sharon Tate scene where she watches her own movie. She's watching the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah, that is weird.
And Chuck Norris is apparently in that because Bruce Lee also consulted on that as the fight choreographer.
Oh, okay.
Which did get included in the movie.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I will also say, as another reading recommendation, if you go out and find that wild PD 187 piece and want to read more. It's so good.
Everyone should go down and read it in the notes like right now.
Yeah. Also just generally like one of the best Letterboxd presences, I think. But there's this really amazing book called MIA, Myth-Making in America by H. Bruce Franklin, which is like first really lucidly, clearly like lays out the facts and the numbers to just totally like dispel this myth and remove kind of all of the emotion and feeling from it. So it's just like very clearly revealed as a lie. But then he sort of breaks down the like cultural influence, looking at, the Missing in Action movies, Rambo, Uncommon Valor with Gene Hackman also.
Oh, right. There was another one too. Good Guys Wear Black. Is that what it was? Yeah, like, from 78.
An earlier Chuck Norris movie. And then there's like, some like shitty paperback thrillers and like board games and video games and stuff, of course, that came out of this that he
Nothing
looks at.
says America like selling back people's like unhinged traumas back to them.
Roll to see if you get the POW saved.
No, I will. One more thing on the additional reading note, though. I do actually, we're recording this September 19th. I do have an article actually about the whole POW MIA thing coming out tomorrow, September 20th, in conjunction with Rambo Last Blood, over at the Outline.
Awesome. So when people hear that, I think that will be about a week ago.
Yeah,
but there will be an article up.
Yeah.
So go check it out. We'll probably put it in the show notes as well.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Nice little primer to the whole weird thing. So
exactly. All right. Well, I think that will wrap it up for that was Missing in Action 1984, and we're going to be right back. We're going to be talking POW, The Escape.
They stay here.
David Carradine, the prisoner they couldn't hold, is now the soldier they can't stop. POW, The Escape.
All right, we are back, and we are talking POW, The Escape.
Also known as Attack Force Nom or something like that.
Attack Force Nom, Behind Enemy Lines is also the other one from the year 1986. Is an American action film directed by one Gideon Amir, his one and only film that he directed. It stars David Carradine in a similar role to Chuck Norris. He plays Colonel James Cooper. Who
You think this was the director's story he just had to tell?
He needed to. Well, also it was it's same production company, Canon.
Oh, yeah,
Canon, the Canon group or whatever it was. So
looking at his IMDb page, he was a producer on the Missing in Action movies and wrote all of the American Ninja movies. And he's actually still working today. He is a producer on shows like DC's Doom Patrol, which is like
amazing.
I don't know, kind of a fascinating career pivot from canon films to like contemporary teen television, I guess.
Well, honestly, what that kind of just shows you is kind of just how the industry has changed. I think. I think it's just like clearly this guy, he just follows the trends and he produces the stuff that's people are paying money to see.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the how to track the revenue of teen television on. I'm assuming the DC's Doom Patrol is like a CW show.
Yeah, I think so. Or sci-fi, maybe. Honestly, I have no fucking idea. I am like out of my depth.
Yeah,
Do you know
but,
how
I think CW. Yeah.
did this film do well? Did it do well? Like
what was the
Missing
thing
in
we
Action
just
did?
talked about? There's a connection here. We just talked about the CW on the show for some reason too. Oh,
You're right.
The guy from Beastmaster.
Yes.
Is also the guy who played Beastmaster now does roles for the CW superhero shows.
Oh.
He was
Is it
on
Mark Singer? Is that
he
what
was
his
on
name
one
was?
of those. Yeah. So like a lot of these guys who didn't find work like after the after the 80s ended, even though they were, ripping off Stallone movies and ripping off Schwarzenegger movies,
Yeah.
now they're just doing CW superhero TV shows.
Oh, okay.
This is officially a trend.
Yep.
We are marking it right here.
You heard it here first.
But I will say, POW, maybe just on the virtue that we paired it with Missing in Action, it seems like a good movie.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. Like after you get, it's kind of like Rambo in the sense of after you get past the main conspiracy theory, you're just kind of like, all right, well now that we're past that, let's see what you guys got character wise and plot wise. And
at least
there's some twists and turns.
At least, this had the idea of if we're going to make a movie about how we should care so much about these fictional POWs.
Let's make it about them.
Yeah, let's make a movie about a
just one
guy
asshole.
who really deeply does care for them.
Yeah.
And actually struggles with caring for them because some of them are assholes.
Yeah, yeah.
But he
Everybody
does it on a
comes home.
principle anyway. And it kind of does more of like a reverse heist, like a Great Escape style
Yeah,
narrative to
yeah.
it, where the intrigue is one, who they're breaking out, the different characters, and then the logistics of how they're breaking them out.
Yeah.
Which just on its face is a better idea for a movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than just Chuck Norris like
Single-handedly taking just a few guys.
well
out.
yeah and doing it because he just has to prove that he's right, like not
Yeah,
doing
as
it for any
opposed
other
to
reason, whereas
actually caring about the
It's a
humanity.
little silly and it's a little saccharine, but David Carradine, what's the line that he has? Everybody goes home.
Yeah, everybody goes home.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he has a thing that he believes in that he sticks to, and
Yeah.
you believe that he believes in it at the very least.
Yeah.
Even if I will say there is a bit of a significant downgrade, or maybe it was just the way that we watched it. It seemed like
We had to watch it on like Daily Motion,
it
480p.
It seemed like there was a little bit less money or craft allowed
Yeah.
to be put into this, because at least Joseph Zito, he was able to get some, big chase scenes. He was able, I don't remember where they shot it. I think they shot it in Thailand, actually.
Oh,
Whereas
okay.
here, I think they had to shoot it in the US. so they kind of like built some sets and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, it feels like it because it's so much more of a straight up war movie with like actual battlefields with tanks and stuff. It's just so different from the almost Splinter Cell like set pieces in Missing in Action, where I don't know, there's just something so odd about this movie where I kind of went into it thinking, this is like a knockoff of Missing in Action, which is already a knockoff of Rambo. So it's like 2 degrees a knockoff. Maybe that just means it's like more honest or something, or like maybe the good genes skipped a generation.
Yeah.
But it is interesting how this is like much more of a war movie than Missing in Action ever really is.
Yeah, well, because I kind of felt like watching this, like, it's not anywhere near as good, but I kind of got, like, a little bit of, like, a Dirty Dozen style vibe out of this in comparison.
Sure.
Where just the drama is inherently more compelling to watch. And, I mean, David Carradine and Steve James are just much more compelling performers to watch.
Yes.
So even when this does veer into the similar realm of, like, kind of, like, ludicrous rah-rah, David Carradine, like, got an American flag, like, over his shoulder while he's gunning people down. Steve James is, like, doing somersaults, like, while firing his gun.
It's great.
And like at least even when it goes into that, I had some attachment to Steve James. I had some attachment to David Carradine. And it complicates things a little bit too with it's Captain Vin, I guess is who they call him in this. Who is a Vietnamese general who is trying to make his way to his family in America near the tail end of the war.
Right.
And
he's trying to make a deal with David.
Yeah, you get a little bit of that kind of like Inglourious Bastards. Like they're trying to...
Exactly. That's exactly what
individuals trying to weaponize the situations and powers that they know that they have for a limited time.
And that is just inherently more interesting than anything that MIA does.
Yeah, I feel like we're giving it credit for just doing things that movies should just do.
Right.
But like, I guess just in comparison, like it seems
and
it seems amazing.
Here's the thing too. When I went into this film, and like the first 5 minutes was, even though you have David like still acting much better than Chuck Norris, I got similar vibes at first, and I was like, are we gonna have another one of these? So I even went into this kind of backed up a little tense. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this, and it was able to convince me otherwise. So I mean, I don't think it was even necessarily just the comparison to MIA, because I was about to compare the hell out of it in regards to just like, I thought it was going to be the same movie again, but with David Carradine. So I was just very happy when all these character moments happened, and like there was some more nuance between the characters themselves, or even what we just discussed with the Vietnamese leader trying to get to America, There's more twists, there's more turns, it's just more interesting.
There's one genuinely suspenseful sequence where they're trying to break the guys out in the back of the truck.
Yeah.
And it's the Vietnamese general has made a deal to, if they take him to America, he'll take them out of Vietnam. And the sequence where the guy's like inspecting the truck, and then you think that he's gotten away, but then he's just like, you're in the wrong direction, I'm gonna check again, and then he just like brutally shoots that dude in the face. Like that, like the actual, even just the visual vocabulary of that sequence of events is so much more interesting in direct comparison to Chuck Norris like escaping out of his room and doing the espionage stuff that he does, which on paper should be interesting, but Chuck Norris for some reason just can't make that interesting.
I also feel like so much of it really kind of comes down to like just the casting. Because even though Chuck Norris is like a bigger star, I guess, than David Carradine is, David Carradine is just like such a better screen presence. I like trust him almost with my own life. Like, Chuck Norris, I would not trust with my life.
I feel like he would leave you behind.
Right. Yeah. David Carradine has this moral code apparently, and I like really believe it. And also, I think just like the difference in casting in the like commanders in the two movies, the fact that the Vietnamese commander in Missing in Action is the guy from Seinfeld, and the Vietnamese commander in POW The Escape is played by Mako, who is in the Conan the Barbarian movies.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, was nominated for an Academy Award, and also voiced Aku in Samurai Jack, which like I did not know that. So I don't know, just like the like performance level is just kind of like, even if it's not like the greatest work of either Mako or David Carradine, just like their presences, there's a lot more charisma and a lot more gravity to their characters than there is like in anyone's performance in Missing in Action.
Yeah, something I also liked between Steve James and David was as the movie goes on, David's giving his slogan, I guess, if it were the whole "everybody goes home."
Yeah, take a shot.
And they actually
every time.
have a scene where Steve James like questions him on it. He's like, "Dude, that's not a religion. That's a slogan you have." You know what I mean? Like that. I just like that. It's it's not super deep or anything like that, but
they just sort of feel like people.
Exactly. It's like at a certain point you have to question the leader that just keeps going. Everybody goes home regardless of who dies.
They were like, dude, even the asshole who was like betraying us. They were like, everybody.
Yeah.
They're like,
It's just there's more nuance to it at the end of the day, and I appreciated that.
Yeah. And David Carradine definitely has like a weariness to him too. He does a lot of this like, I'm getting too old for this shit. But because it's funny, he also is a martial artist, so he's also doing like the martial arts stuff, which is still just like a weird thing from like the canon movies.
Yeah,
that, like,
it's just
favorite
a lot of kicking.
Yeah. One of my favorite scenes is where he's fighting the one other prisoner while they're in the Vietnam prison camp, and as he keeps kicking this guy's ass, the guy that keeps getting sent down to the ground just keeps letting go of the weapon he had and then grabbing another one, getting up and starting to try to do it again. And it's just it's pretty funny to watch, actually. And it's not funny in the way that I'm like laughing at it. I think they were kind of trying to do that a little bit because I don't know. I found it comedic to see this guy just keep getting knocked down by David, grab another piece of wood and try to get him again.
I was really surprised by how much of the movie is not given to David Carradine, how much focus there is on the other men. And it really does feel like the difference sort of between this movie and Missing in Action is kind of comes down to like an evolution of genre, where POW The Escape feels much more in the war movie, the kind of classic war movie mode where it's, this ensemble of guys and, there is a leader, but they're all sort of given a presence within the movie, whereas Missing in Action is just totally, individualist, like totally the hero, nobody but Chuck Norris really. And so it just sort of like signal this kind of, I don't know, these are both Vietnam War movies, but they're just totally fundamentally different ways, I think, of approaching war and conflict.
And it's amazing too, because they literally have the same plot. A single guy goes back in to rescue some POWs, and that single guy is from a TV show where he does martial arts. So like they could not have more of the exact same premise,
right?
And be done completely differently and written by the same guy.
That too. That's fascinating. It really is to realize it's been written by the same guy. It's coming out of the same brain, and yet we just have far more nuance in this one.
Yeah, and like there is attention paid to, some of the POWs he's rescuing are suffering from PTSD, like that scene we see when the one guy goes to the brothel and he even has sort of like flash cut or flashbacks, which to be fair, they did also rip that from Rolling Thunder.
Yes. But hey, they're trying.
But hey, look, that's a good reference point. I do love Rolling Thunder. It is one of the more like underrated Vietnam sort of psychosis movies that's out there. And I really loved Steve James in this too.
Yeah, he's great.
All of the stuff where him and David Carradine are going back and forth, and both of them have just had enough of each other's shit. But like they're obviously both, really want to get out of Vietnam at the same time. Yeah. So like there's just sort of like an unconventional like push and pull relationship between Carradine and sort of the men that he's rescuing. Mm-hmm. And that's just, it's so much more compelling to watch on a moment-to-moment basis, despite the fact that, I think the films are basically the same length pretty much. And despite the fact that they clearly didn't have the money to do like as compelling of action. Like
No,
a lot of
yeah.
the action in this suffers a little bit in comparison to Missing in Action, just because they can't do an espionage sequence, they can't do a giant car chase sequence, they can't do like they kind of just do sort of like the chaos of war sequences is mostly what they do.
Yeah.
It is interesting. If Wikipedia is to be believed, if these sources are to be believed, their budgets were kind of similar. Like
Holy
Missing
shit.
in Action, it lists as either 1.5 or 3 million, and POW is 2 million. But it is like, the box office grosses are so drastically different between the two movies.
Okay, so is this one like
Less,
a failure?
I assume.
Yeah, this was, according to Box Office Mojo, just like 2.5 million, as opposed to Missing in Action's 23 million.
Wow.
wow.
Pretty significant.
Yeah, but it is just like very, very different uses of money. And I imagine that like Chuck Norris had some specific stipulations for the kind of sequences he wanted to do.
I got
Did
a
he
one-armed
have a lot
machine
of-
gun
did
in
he-
slow
yeah.
motion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Did he have a lot of say in that regard, like all the time, pretty much, when
You
it
know,
came to his movies?
I don't actually know, but I kind of feel like he probably would.
Yeah.
Just being like something.
Definitely the vibe I
so
get
hard
from
by
MIA.
that point. Yeah, and he sort of does seem to have, like a kind of demanding personality, maybe.
Yeah.
And I could see him having an incredibly inflated image of himself. And
Me too.
probably like making a lot of irrational demands on set. Whereas, David Carradine is just like such a like working man. Of that, like, I feel like those were probably two very different on-set experiences.
Carradine does still get to do some kung fu on their asses, though.
Hell yeah.
He does a
Yeah.
little bit of that. There's at one point, I think he just like out of nowhere like drop kicks a guy.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to mention this, and this might be incorrect. I don't know, but there's a sequence where David Carradine's character is in disguise, and he's using one of the conical hats, and he's guiding a donkey. And I swear to God, that's what Tropic Thunder is referencing with RDJ. When he says
Oh
the
my
line where
God.
he's like, "I'm a lead
Oh,
farmer,
right.
motherfucker," or whatever.
Right.
Dude, I'm pretty sure that this is the reference, and I'm like, this is so deep cut, like holy shit. But I mean, I've just never seen it in any other Vietnam movie.
Yeah, I
so
didn't
far.
notice that, but that sounds right.
Yeah, so I was like, I just thought I had a
Amazing.
moment when I saw it, and I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, this is still this movie is still kind of kneecapped by the fact that there's still so many great Vietnam War movies out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that it
And we've seen
never
quite a
reaches
few
that
on the
height.
show.
It's just like it has watchable actors attempting to do characters.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're like, there you go.
And I also
a
think
movie.
the
Sure, why
the
not?
finale sequence isn't too bad. They have the part where the Vietnamese guy is holding the two grenades, and he's like, "If you don't drop your
Oh, yeah,
guns,
that's a
I'll
great
kill the
sequence.
rest of the troops or whatever." And then there's that back and forth between David and him,
Well,
where he
I-
pushes him into the metal.
I
and-
love how every single one of his soldiers is like trying to be, or every single one of the POWs, like each one is stepping up to be like the brave one who like
Yeah.
sacrifices themselves.
Right.
And every time Carradine's like, no, no.
Everybody goes home. What part of that don't you understand, people?
Yeah, I got this. Don't worry about
And
it.
I love too that they even have a nice moment where the one guy he sacrifices himself for the troops by landing on the grenade or whatever, and then you get that nice moment where it's recalling the line, and he's just like, "Everybody goes home, right, Colonel?" Like that kind of thing. Just that kind of sappy, goodbye to a
Yeah,
character.
well, and I will say that final action set piece works for me just because it is less of like the slow-mo fetishizing. It's more
Yeah.
matter of fact.
Absolutely,
you know?
yeah.
So
for
like
sure.
I
it's more focused on the brotherhood too.
Yeah.
more so than just like we're slaughtering a bunch of Vietnamese soldiers.
so even though it's like smaller
Although
in
it has
scale
plenty of that.
and less absurd, like I found it still kind of worked. And that bit where he pushes the dude onto the wooden post and like gores him is
yeah.
actually
Oh
pretty
my
gross.
God.
yeah,
And then when they like bring him back while he's gored on this contraption and like seems like he's still alive, just fucking brutal.
yeah, for sure.
And
No, totally. That's actually more gory than anything that appears in Missing in Action, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think they even
for
do
sure.
another shot where they show him like and the wound and everything, and him
do
just
they?
laying down on the ground.
See,
Yeah.
I was more struck by
pretty
just
visceral.
the shot of the piece of wood that they put him
Yeah,
on, because it's got like chunks of flesh on it when they
Yep.
show it after he's been pulled off of it or whatever.
Yeah,
And I was like, ugh, a little bit much there.
Yeah, but the finale ended up being pretty exciting and satisfying, I will say.
But yeah, I would just say, like, overall, it's just like, this just seemed, despite the fact that, again, same premises, this just seemed genuinely interested in the conflict that would arise if there were these imaginary POWs.
Yeah, exactly.
And that there is, like, kind of like an interest in the individual POWs. I do think that the guy who suffers from PTSD, I think he has that line too where he's like, he tells the Vietnamese general, like, if you shoot me, you'd be doing me a favor.
Right.
Because he doesn't even want to go home, which is like an interesting shade to point out, because Chuck Norris wouldn't have even considered if that guy wanted to go home.
Yeah.
You know? Like, it's just like, no, you're going home because you're
'Cause
my
I have a
political tool,
point-
buddy.
Yeah, I have a point to prove.
And then there's a subplot about like stealing gold in the middle of wartime.
Oh yeah. And of course, though, David's like, nope, I'm giving it back to the army. It's not for me. I'm a good
Yeah,
boy.
which has a little bit of I don't know if either of you have seen it, but Kelly's Heroes. That's a huge part of
I haven't seen it.
of that Men on a Mission movie, is that during World War II they just like straight up go behind enemy lines to rob a bank. Yeah, a Nazi bank, basically.
Yeah.
So like it has a little bit of shades of that, where they are trying to steal like the Vietnamese gold on their way out, and then there's the one American guy who wants to take it, but then obviously it's the Vietnamese general who wants to take it on his way home. So like there's just so much more happening on like a character conflict level that they seem to like pay attention to and to care about, that it doesn't really make the film rise to, I would say, greatness.
Yeah.
But I appreciated it.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
In watching this basically directly after Missing in Action, especially.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But again, I would say it's probably still does not top Rambo First Blood Part 2.
Oh, hell no.
No.
Not even close.
No.
Which again,
I mean, I love.
is
I
just
adored that
so
movie.
truthful in its expression of, again, the emotional sentiment of this feeling. Again, if we're going to talk about this sort of POW myth as more of a feeling that vets had,
Yep.
Rambo
what I do with Rambo
feels like a real expression of that, and even he has that corny line at the end of that film where he was just like, "We just want our country to care about us as much as we care about
our
it."
country. Love it. Fucking Rambo, baby. But yeah.
And so this film doesn't quite get to that territory.
No.
But always glad to watch David Carradine. I want to see
he's
more
great.
David Carradine.
Yeah.
Nathan,
Yeah.
is there an underrated David Carradine performance that you can think of? Because
Sure,
I honestly
y'all
haven't
gotta
seen
watch
a
that
whole
shit.
lot except for his brief stint in. I'm pretty sure he's in The Long Goodbye. I do like him in Death
in
Race
Mean Streets, I
2000,
think?
even though he spends most of that movie kind of like wearing like a mask.
Oh, does he? Yeah.
But he's.
I think he makes a. I don't know if he's a big part, but I think I saw him in Mean Streets.
Yeah, he is in Mean Streets.
Yeah. Larry Cohen's Q, the Winged Serpent.
Oh, hell yeah! We did
haven't
some
done
Larry
that.
Cohen
We
on
did.
the show.
We just
too.
did Larry Cohen on the
Yeah.
show a few months ago.
He was on my
now.
list. I
yeah.
didn't know that he was in that.
So we have to do Q.
That's
There are,
awesome.
there are honestly so many, like looking just at his letterbox page right now, like so many movies with fucking amazing posters, like
Yeah, for
Well,
real.
Crime Zone and Armed Response. And,
Yeah, friend of the show, Andrew Law of the Bunta Vista podcast, he recommended a long time ago that we do The Long Riders, because it's Walter Hill's
yeah.
cowboy movie with all of the Carradine brothers, all of David Carradine's real brothers.
Oh, shit.
Keith Carradine, Robert Carradine.
I didn't know the others were actors. That's cool.
Yeah, so they play the James gang. So they play like the
cool.
James brothers in that movie.
That's cool.
also both Quaid brothers and both Keach brothers too.
Holy
in
shit,
one.
3 different sets of brothers in that movie.
All the bros.
Wow,
Just
that's awesome.
Bros being bros.
Yeah, okay, so we got to do the Long Riders at some point
Yeah.
for sure. But yeah, I think maybe angling towards the reductive rating and final statements on this one. This one for me gets kind of like a low 3. Low
Nice.
3, I would say it. I would say it's not, because I did give Rambo the 3 too, but I think that's a cosmically high 3.
Yeah. Yeah.
In comparison.
3.9999.
Yeah, kind of like, around there. And basically for all the reasons that we've said. I mean, we started talking about this one. I feel like it seems like we have less to say, but it's because we started talking about it during the missing in action
Because it's like we wanted to start talking about this one.
Yeah, already. And basically for all the reasons that we've said, it's just like, these actors are actually playing characters.
Yep.
There's at least 3 layers of plotting to this that reveals more complications about his mission than just rescuing these imaginary POWs.
It's like the line in MIA that he says over and over again, which is "We'll figure it out" or "Don't worry, I have a plan." Would never work with this movie because you would have to show it in some way.
Yeah, and I think that there's just there's a little bit of like real tension into David Carradine, like trying to maintain his moral code that he believes in and that you believe that he believes in.
Yeah.
Even if it applies to a situation that isn't real.
Yeah.
You do believe his conviction, like when he looks straight into the general's eyes and he's like, "Kill me now or I'll be goddamn sure to kill you later."
Yeah.
And like that's just like that's a killer
Good
line.
stuff.
And like
Hell
again,
yeah.
Chuck Norris doesn't even get a cool line like that in his movies. He's
true.
kind of just a weirdo.
That's a good point. It's like you'd think that they'd at least give him 1 or 2 huge one-liners, but I don't remember a goddamn thing he said in MIA besides "We'll figure it out." So I just like, it's odd.
And nothing anyone says in either of these movies compares to Sylvester Stallone. We talked about it at length in the episode we did on First Blood Part 2, but that bit where he is being tortured, very sensually tortured, with shirtless by the Soviets.
Yeah.
And then he sits behind the desk and they tell him to communicate with like the American general. And he grabs that mic with his bicep. He squeezes it.
Like he's squeezing a throat.
Yeah, and the second he squeezes it, like lightning strikes.
Yeah.
And then he goes, "I'm coming for you.
I'm coming for you."
Like goddamn pro wrestler.
God, it gets me pumped right now.
Just thinking about it.
Pro wrestling is the best comparison to that like moment for sure.
he goes for it. But POW The Escape does have, like the fact that it's referencing better Vietnam films like Vietnam movies like Rolling Thunder or better war films, like it made me think of Kelly's Heroes. It made me think of The Dirty Dozen. It made me think of briefly of The Great Escape. So, like, I was sitting there thinking, oh, okay, this is slightly worse than all of those movies, but, like, I can see the gestures towards all of them, and they're admirable.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
They tried to make a real movie. So, yeah, that's what gets it up to the low 3 for me. And I did have a lot of fun watching both Steve James and David Carradine in this film. And Mako, I think Nathan was right, too, that there actually is shades to the Vietnam general in this film that are serious and different. And he plays an individual compelling character who has his own sort of, it is kind of important that this takes place near the end of the war and not after the war. Yeah. So at least it has some semblance of like, there were still prisoners of war before the war actually ended.
Yeah, right.
So
it makes a little more sense. 'Cause I think it was, I don't know if it was you that said it, but it was something along the lines, it's like, well, 10 years later, obviously, like, did you think the Vietnamese people would be feeding them?
Yeah.
And, like they'd be dead. Like, I mean, they would.
Yeah, I think it was Nathan who mentioned that.
Like, you think that, right. Like, they wouldn't be using their resources on prisoners this long after, like, what would be the point of keeping them? Like, there's no logic to it at all.
They could just put them in a ditch and cover them up and everything's done.
Yeah.
They don't need to, like, maliciously torture them in bamboo cages for, like, 10 years.
So at least you're right, with this movie, at least they're like, it's the tail end of Vietnam. It's not 10 years after.
Right, and there's something interesting about the general realizing it's the tail end and that it's almost over and that he wants out and weaponizing the little bit of power that he has to make a deal with Carradine and the soldiers. So, like, there's something at least dramatically coherent to that.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, again, I could not think of a single dramatically coherent thing that Chuck Norris does.
No, not one, I know.
Even though they, like, in the screenplay, they're like, yeah, sorta. Like, he has PTSD or something, and he, like, sorta, he cares
destroyed
a little
television, so, I mean, he's obviously mad about it.
Yeah, he's really mad about Spider-Man.
Cartoons all day long.
Watches Spider-Man all day.
Exactly.
To deal with it.
Yeah, but for you, Jamie?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3 as well. I was just continually shocked at how much I was enjoying the film as it went on, because I after watching MIA,
I wish I could see it in higher quality. Someone
me too.
should
Yeah, I would love
Blu-ray
to
this
see
shit.
this on a
Canon,
real like
get on it.
DVD set or something like that. But yeah, the fact that they actually try to have character is a huge step up. David himself is obviously giving a performance as compared to Chuck Norris, who isn't and just seems like he's just there, and I'm Chuck Norris, and that's enough for you people. So yeah, the building brotherhood that happens with the soldiers, I really enjoyed. There's a couple twists and turns, even though they're not all that intelligent. They're still there, and you can tell that they were trying to create some more interesting scenarios compared to MIA. And it is really shocking to hear that the writer is the same. I don't know, maybe if Chuck Norris is the one that just took all of the interesting points out of MIA, but it really seems like the writer did a better job with this one. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 3, and I thought it was pretty good.
I am also going to go with trusted number 3. For much the same reason it was just like a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah.
It has a sort of like smallness of scope and a kind of termiteness to it that, almost feels, in addition to, gesturing towards like better war movies and better Vietnam movies, like you said, Josh, it also kind of like, it has this ensemble quality, kind of almost like a Howard Hawks movie, or like, I said earlier, Samuel Fuller's The Steel Helmet, one of the few Korea movies. It just like has this sort of like nice, tight little structure to it that just feels kind of almost classical. Whereas Missing in Action, there's like no way to really think about or examine that movie beyond Chuck Norris. Like that movie is Chuck Norris. Like for better and worse, and POW The Escape, like gives itself to multiple people and kind of allows them to exist, not just as characters, but sort of outside the conflict even a little bit, just in that they're not just pure manifestations of ideology,
Yeah.
Both Missing in Action and Rambo 2 are propaganda, but like of very different kinds, where like you guys were saying, First Blood Part 2 just captures the pure, intense feeling visually, the kind of the fervence of belief and the almost religious faith in this conspiracy theory.
Oh, how many times does like Stallone get pinned up like Christ on like the bamboo?
Yeah, it's fucking amazing.
And Missing in Action is just like the dry copy of like what the belief in live prisoners was. It's like not the feeling of it. It doesn't. You can look at First Blood Part 2 in a non kind of ideological way, as people who don't agree with that or believe in that theory. We can say, okay, so this is what it feels like to believe in it. And like we can establish.
No, that's a great
way
point
to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. Missing in Action is just like, this is just straight up, like bullshit.
Okay.
What I said with Part 2, though. Yeah. Remember, I was like, this movie, even though I disagree, makes me feel like a fucking red-blooded American. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where I watch Rambo Part 2 and I'm just like, yeah, America.
Okay,
even though...
so counterpoint. Here's an interesting thought process. So is Missing in Action the more revealing film about how bullshit it is?
Oh, yeah, it's like cosmic galaxy brain shit.
Because it's not viscerally rendering the feeling of it, you're just flipped there going,
this is
really
gross.
This is what I believe.
We're taking a turn here. I like it.
I mean, yeah, it's just kind of a like man going slowly insane in his hotel room.
I guarantee you there's a fucking essay of somebody saying that thing, just totally deep. Oh my god, that's amazing.
No, yeah, I think that about sums it up, because it really does feel like Stallone gets on the wavelength of how good it must feel to righteously believe in something like that, to be fighting against something, to care about something that much.
Yeah.
Whereas again, Chuck Norris could not appear to care less, to be more vacuous, less there, and strictly believe in like these weird like gripes he has with just like Southeast Asian people.
Yeah, yeah.
He's just like, I'm really mad at them, and I'm gonna prove that they're assholes.
Yep.
That's
and then
it.
the movie justifies it.
Yeah. There you go. All right. Well, I think that will wrap it up for this week's episode. That was Missing in Action, 1984, as well as POW The Escape, 1986. Thanks so much for bringing these films with you, Nathan. This is the
these
part
are
of the
fun.
show where if you've got anything to plug, you can do it right here.
You can find most everything I do over at Twitter. On twitter.com, my handle is at Trillmore Girls, like the television show Gilmore Girls, but with the word trill instead of Gil. Figure it out. That's where most things I do are. But like Josh said, I have writing at Pitchfork and a few other places online. And by the time this episode comes out, the article that I mentioned earlier will be out over at the Outline. A nice little tidy, handy primer to the whole crazy POW MIA thing, with a lot of juicy, delicious facts about that insane man, Bo Gritz, who had really he's still alive, but one of the fucking strangest lives of anybody.
Yeah, no, we talked about him a little bit on the Rambo First Blood Part 2 episode because he actually just is like an insane man. Kind of respect a little bit. And while we're at it, I wanted to plug Nathan. I thought wrote one of the best pieces for the Outline about the new Chucky movie, Child's Play.
Oh, cool.
About sort of Chucky versus sort of like capitalism and the corporation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he did a good overview, I think, of sort of like the franchise as well as all the way up to sort of Don Mancini losing the rights to his film and kind of creating like this new monstrosity in its own sense that is sort of interesting just in its sort of existence. Because I was shocked when I finally watched that movie and I was like, wow, weirdly enough, this remake adheres closer to what Mancini envisioned for the original than the original film does. And I like the original better still, but it's just... It was interesting to see that someone had enough pull to actually do what Mancini wanted to do, which was do the whole, the corporation invades the home and then sort of exacerbates the kid's anxieties and sort of acts on his feelings and his rage towards the
trying
people
to
around
satisfy
him.
The kid himself.
Yeah, the only thing it was missing is the bit about how then they start blaming the kid.
Yeah,
because they think that it's the kid who's angry and is like killing people, and they're like, no, it's the doll, I swear. Yeah. But anyway, I can recommend checking that one out. I think that was for the Outline, right, Nathan?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Thanks for the kind words.
No problem. For our listeners, I think we're going to be back in 1 week's time with a patron bonus episode, and it's going to be the first episode of October, which, as everyone knows, Spooktober.
Oh, yeah.
At this time of year, all we do is we do horror movies for like a month, sometimes a month and a half, because we want to squeeze so many in. But it's going to be our first episode for October, so we are going to be doing some pure 80s B-movie trash.
Oh, yeah.
Chopping Mall, which I can't remember the year on it now, but I think it's like mid to early 80s. It might be 85.
I think it's 86.
86? Yeah.
I could be wrong. I think it's 86.
But it's kind of like a proto Corman-esque, Dante-esque like satire on like these like short circuit mall cops that just start going on a murderous rampage. And we're going to be pairing it with, weirdly enough, somehow I found this out. There is another film specifically that takes place all night in a mall where people are being slaughtered by these weird tiny creatures. And in this one, it is sorority babes in the slime ball bowl-orama.
I was shocked at how many things connected with these two movies.
Yes,
when I watched
both
them.
take place entirely in shopping malls, basically, and there are a lot of teens, horny teens, getting murdered. So that is going to be the first episode of October. But in 2 weeks' time, and again, that's patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for the bonus episode, because that's next week. But in 2 weeks, we're coming back with another free episode. We're coming back with another guest. And we are actually going to be looking into some sort of Asian comedy horror.
Cool.
And a little bit of
Is
action
it
in there,
similar
too.
to, what was that, apartment horror? movie that we
World Apartment Horror.
That's the one,
It could be in that realm because I have actually never seen either of these, and I asked this guy because I know that he's seen a lot of trash, so I asked him for deep cuts. So he is bringing with him Ricky Lau's Mr. Vampire
Okay.
from 1985, which I haven't seen, but it was described as kind of like a action comedy horror film.
Okay.
And I think it might be Chinese or Hong Kong, possibly.
Yeah, it's from Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, that's what I assume. So I think they're both from Hong Kong then, because the other one is The Seventh Curse from 1986 with Chow Yun Fat.
That is a wacky movie. Like,
Okay.
Fuck yeah.
it's like Temple of Doom, kind of, but with Chow Yun Fat and like even grosser and nastier than Temple of Doom.
Crazy, yeah,
it's
because that
pretty
one's
great.
described as like fantasy horror. So I was like
Sweet.
curious,
I'm very excited.
interesting.
Yeah.
This will be an
That
interesting episode.
So yeah, that's going to be a batshit episode because we haven't
Yeah.
seen either. Usually I've seen like one of the films that we're
Right.
talking about, or I have some semblance of context to, you know, sort of have a lens to look at them through. But these look very unique, and it was what I asked for, so I got what I asked for.
Yeah.
But that is going to be the second episode of our sort of Spooktober marathon as we focus exclusively on horror movies. But yeah, I think that will wrap it up for this week's episode. Thanks, as always, for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, y'all.